Welcome back to the Budget Gamer channel, where we bring you critical and in-depth reviews of just about every indie game we can get our hands on, and today we're going to be taking a look at Icey for the Nintendo Switch. Icey, if you're like one of many gamers that have never heard of it, is a 2D action platformer, but besides its upgraded graphics and soundtrack, it really does a lot to stand out from that typical Castlevania feel. Starting out with Icey's story, it is definitely unique and full of intrigue, and it's something that I really don't want to spoil, so I'll tell you what I can. All we really know in Icey is that there's some entity called Judas that's apparently really bad. And we know based on just the idea of this being a video game and there being a large villain that you as Icey seek to destroy Judas. However, where the story actually starts getting really interesting is with the integration of the game's meta-commentary. We're told time and time again, with the message constantly reinforced, that if we want to beat the game, all we have to do is follow the arrows. However, the more often you buck the narrator's instructions to just follow the arrows and beat the game, the more of the story actually starts to unveil itself. You might find yourself completely disregarding the forecasted path to the end of the game and find some sort of unique treasure, or even discover things like potentially new endings of the game. However, despite all of these potentially comical or eye-opening situations you could find yourself in, the meta-commentary isn't the only unique feature of the game. In the actual gameplay, once we take over the main character, we're taught how to do a few things such as strike or jump or dodge, which are all things that we would expect from a side-scrolling combat game. However, as you dive into combat or find hidden treasure troves, you'll gain cash, and this cash can be spent on upgrades for Icey at any one of the game's checkpoints. And while these upgrades do provide the obvious avenues for upgrading your HP, defense, and other sort of stats, the game allows you to upgrade and unlock multiple combos between light and heavy attacks, as well as new combos that can allow you to just juggle enemies for hours. But even with this massive system of upgradable combos, Icey doesn't exactly allow you to just button mash your enemies to death. While you can go in charging full bore and just hitting your heaviest attacks over and over and over, combos be darned, if a player really wants to get ahead in the game, they'll need some pretty expert timing. Though dodging enemy attacks with the dash button will obviously require some expert timing, once you've whittled down an enemy's HP far enough, they become susceptible to a critical attack. And by pressing A at exactly the right moment, you can take off a massive chunk of a boss's HP, or completely devastate some minor enemies. And not only will this end the combat a little bit more quickly, but it'll reward you with extra cash, refill your HP, and even put out some potential energy for a massive attack should you have that skill unlocked. But moving on from combat, and even though the meta-commentary might seem to discourage it, the game is based largely on exploration. And very early in the game, you'll be able to upgrade your dash and give yourself vertical movement. And while this is obviously going to be pretty valuable for establishing your aerial combos in combat, it's also incredibly valuable for exploring portions of the game, as well as potentially frustrating your narrator. But after addressing all of the game's general points, it's time to move into some of the finer dynamics. As you can probably already tell from the game's capture footage, visually it's really impressive, and the soundtrack is held to the same standard. However, one thing that a player is going to notice is that while the scripting of the meta-commentary is actually pretty on point, the delivery doesn't exactly hold up. And while the narrator obviously does try to emote through the script, it's a pretty mediocre performance. And though I've definitely played games with meta-commentary that did it a lot worse, such as Y2K and maybe Unepic, I've also played games that did it a lot better, such as Bastion. But like I said, the script is actually written pretty well, so if you can get past the narrator's acting, I'm sure most players will actually still have a really satisfying experience. The game's combat, though, with its long and chainable combos, is actually really satisfying. However, there are certain situations due to the wave-style combat in an enclosed environment that, given a certain enemy complement, you can find yourself stun-locked for way too long, seriously degrading your health. However, depending on what gaming difficulty mode you're playing in, this may or may not be more or less of a problem. And the final note that I'd like to point out is actually the first note that I pointed out in the beginning of the review, and that's the story. The story in Icey is definitely one that builds and blooms right before your eyes the more given to exploration you are as a player. However, even though you do encounter some pretty cool gaming lore, it doesn't actually seem to add much to the overall gameplay. It's interesting, yes, and it'll make you ask questions, yes, but it seems more like it just adds information instead of adding actual depth. But again, as this is an action platformer, that critique may be seen as completely irrelevant to a good handful of players. So overall, I'd have to say with its sharp graphics, its high quality soundtrack, and its in-depth and well-executed combat, this is going to be a pretty good game for anyone who's actually into the 2D action platformer genre. However, that is considering that this is only about a 2-hour game. And even should you choose to disregard the narrator at every possible turn, exploring every potential avenue the game has to offer, you may only add another hour, maybe 2 at the max to the game's total length. But even though this is a really short game, it's still a good experience, and if you catch it on sale, it might be totally worth it to any potential fans out there. But anyway, that does about wrap up the review of Icey on the Nintendo Switch, so if you enjoyed the review or found it helpful, feel free to throw me a comment or a like to show your support. And don't forget to click that little bell icon when you subscribe to stay updated with the latest content. There are new and unique indies coming out literally every single day, so there's always going to be something new to find right here. But since I can only cover about 3 games a week, if you want an update of which reviews might be coming out next, you can follow us on Twitter. But anyway, this has been Budget Gamers. As always, thanks for watching.